Leah, thank you for having us in your house. It's really a pleasure and a great privilege to be here. I listened to you telling us your story, a whale story, just a few days ago, and it was an amazing experience for me. We're seeing you today as a storyteller, and I know I'm sure you're many other things in your life, but I want to ask you what your path was to storytelling.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you both here. Gosh, my path to storytelling. I mean, I would say at the core of it, it's about communion for me. And I would just say at the very beginning of my life, stories were a big part of saving my life. I moved almost every year between states or between cities, between my parents when I was growing up. And if you've ever had the delight or horror of being the new kid in town, kids aren't always that nice to the new kid. Sure. And it was such a regular part of my life, and books were my escape. They were my mentors, they were my friends, but really they were my escape when I was younger, where I could just defend myself with a book in the playground because I didn't have anyone to play with, Mm-hmm. And as the more I read, the more I wanted to create. And I was really, really lucky. Somewhere along the way, I had teachers and parents who really supported my creativity and my writing. No one ever told me I couldn't do it. I hear so many people where their life somehow, their expression of how life wants to be lived through them gets stymied so young because someone said that they couldn't do it. And I consider myself really lucky in hindsight because at least I don't remember. If somebody said it, I didn't listen, because there's enough of the other. And then when I was 16, my best friend committed suicide. And it was such a destruction of everything that I knew, and there was so much grief, and there was no way of processing it. There was no way of how to handle it. And so I went to my place of sanctuary, which was writing. And I ended up writing this play that ended up winning a place in a playwriting festival. Mm-hmm. So I got to see the play on stage. And I really learned at a young age the responsibility of storytelling, that what you put out into the world comes back. Because while I was there really just trying to process my grief and make sense of something that doesn't make sense, all of a sudden I was standing at the threshold as a teenager, yeah. Of then all these other people coming to me with their grief. And I didn't realize that I was all of a sudden responsible to be present for that. I'm just trying to figure out my own grief. But it taught me at a really young age how to be responsible for what we put out into the world and how to tend to the people who then are opened or affected to find that part in their own life that perhaps they haven't been able to touch yet. And that's what we do as storytellers. We give people access to touch the untouchable sometimes, or the parts that have been hidden.
And when you wrote this play, were you part of it? Were you also acting?
I was. I was. Yeah.
So, because I was wondering, how did you go from writing to actually telling with your word, with your voice, the stories? So you were acting in your first play. Yeah. Beautiful.
I started off, I did writing, I did theater. I was, again, really lucky. I got to study with some incredible masters at a very young age, and I was pulled into a professional theater company. And then I went straight to New York City. My parents said, I was looking at all these to study acting in all these colleges, and my parents said, don't waste your time and our money studying acting in college. And they said, if you want to go to college, get an education, go do that. But if really all you want to do is study acting, then if you can go get yourself into a really good acting school, we'll support you.
Wow.
So I did. And I went to New York City at 18 and was studying acting at Sandy Meisner's Neighborhood Playhouse. And a couple of years of that, and I realized I was not cut out to work in the business as an actress for a million different reasons. I didn't want to speak other people's words. I didn't see a path of success for me. People like me, I didn't see anywhere getting any great roles. So it just didn't. I wasn't cut for it. I wasn't cut out for it, for many different reasons. And then I went and studied. I got to go to an alternative college, and they let me continue with this passion of the arts and theater and finding the stories more in performance art. And really, it was about how do we, because when I was in theater all that time, I could feel something happening in the room. There was this energy that's so palpable that happens. And I was really curious about how do you make good on all that energy that's generated, that's created, so that when you open the theater door, it just doesn't like run out, and that we could be using this energy for great things, and whatever that we define as great things, maybe just that you brought people into a state of connection is great enough, but also, when I was, focusing on environmental justice and social justice, I thought we can actually catalyze this energy through the use of story, and then mobilize people to take action if we create a path for them that exists outside the theater door. And so I got really fascinated by that, and how do we use, the arts for social change? And I use that word use. I would say I used to use the word use. Now I will never use that word when it comes to working with story. I guess that's a sidebar, but if you go to the etymology of use and you really follow it back, and it's being creative and imaginary as you follow the etymology back, but it can take you back to, it takes you back to employment, and you can take it even further back to enslavement. And so when you think, well, I'm going to use that story, there's a life in that story. If it's a sacred story, there's a life form that lives inside of it. And so why on earth would I want to enslave it for my use, for my egoic purpose, when I could collaborate with something and have something revealed to me that is far bigger than I ever could have imagined possible. So
collaborating with the story, this is a beautiful term.
So,
and it goes very well with sacred story.
Yeah.
Like you're really living it, huh?
Yeah. So I thought, writing, theater, filmmaking, I thought it was going to be documentary filmmaking, and so I moved to the Bay Area for that. And I ended up working at Al Gore's television network, and I produced the Green Channel there, and I thought that was going to be the place, get people the information, the inspiration, the motivation, the activation. And when we were looking at all the data, it showed us that people don't respond to data, and that I was actually operating under the wrong question. It's not about what information do we get to people, it's what stories do we get to people. And that little piece liberated me out of this path of where I thought I should be to do good in the world. And it gave me permission to go back to where my genius wants to flow, or the most amount of joy and pleasure and happiness flows through me, which is in that expression of storytelling. And I didn't even know about storytelling, and some friend of mine asked me, rather than, I started reading my short stories in public, and I do these readings, and one of my dearest friends, Dominique, said, Leah, why don't you tell a story rather than read a story? And I was like, oh God, that's for kids, storytelling's for kids. And I'd never seen a professional storyteller. And then I started to see people like Michael Mead, and I started to see people like Carolyn Casey, and I saw Martin Shaw, and all of a sudden, this rumbling started to wake up inside of me, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can weave everything. I can weave this desire to connect people, this deliberation around using our voice with purpose and with intention, being conscious about what stories we put into the world, bringing back, weaving in relationship to ritual and to the land. And that's where story comes from. That's where theater comes from. It's all woven out of a history of ritual and ceremony. So I feel like I'm just going back to the beginning by working with story in this way of ritual and ceremony, that it's how it all started. Dionysus was the first known actor, and what was he doing but a shamanic act of bringing the god into the human form to live among us? And I feel like that is so much of what acting is, but so many aren't taught that, and that is so much of what storytelling is whether it's live or whether it's movie, but we're evoking energies, and we're giving them a place to live on earth among us as humans. It's like our superpower. We can do that, and we can consciously choose. We can see what's in the background. Oh, there's fear, and there's anxiety, and there's the horror, and there's the beauty. Oh, wait, there's some grace, there's some joy, and like it's all back here. And now, as a sacred storyteller, as a conscious creator, I get to sit here and be like, what am I going to give my life force to? And is it going, what story will I allow into this room between us? And what do I want to evoke or provoke, or what do I consciously not want to? So
there's a lot of power into stories, for sure, but we see the power of stories for the listeners. What is the power of story for you? You're talking about rituals. What this lead you to? Would you have a specific ritual that you get used to practice before, after? What is the power of storytelling for you?
You mean in terms of story and ritual? So much of my relationship with story is, and it's what is a sacred story? I'll just start there. And when I use the word sacred, first of all, I feel it's a little bit of a trap to use the word sacred, because I call this blanket sacred. I honor the divinity in you, but what, this one's chopped liver, because and so it's both. There's a life form that lives through them if we have that animistic perspective. And so when I think of sacred story, what I'm calling on is that language of saying, I see the divine in you, I see the life in you, and I honor the life inside of you. So it's saying that there's a soul, there's a spirit that lives in the story. And so as a sacred storyteller, when I consciously say, okay, I'm going to evoke the spirit of this story, and so what does it mean to evoke the spirit of a story? Well, part of it I feel like is having a relationship with the muse, and part of it is having that humble relationship with the genius, and Michael Meade talks so much about that. In Roman times, they would, on your birthday, they would celebrate your genius, and that, and it's not like you're the egoic or you're so brilliant. It's that life force of the genius that lives through you, and so for me to come into relationship with story is like, it's the best. It's like the egoic brain gets to be turned off, and you get to empty the vessel, and you get to come into this deep state of listening. And that's like step one. So to be into going back, okay, so we're talking about what is it to create ritual performance and ritual theater. I just say first you have to have a relationship with the muse, and that humble relationship of listening to that creative life force that's wanting to be expressed. And then there's also, you have to really know what you're in service to. I once heard someone say, I just open my channel, let anything in. I'm like, whoa, it's like, there's a lot going on out there, and so it's like, if you're in service to love or connection or community or whatever it is, healing the oceans, what are you in service to? And when you know that, I feel like those are the energies that want to align with you and can live through you. And so there's also this element of trust, of deep trust, of trusting that at the end you're going to be in service of something, and sometimes there's going to be a journey, and you might find some hard parts of the story. You might have to face some deep fear, some deep grief as part of the journey to come through. But when you have that relationship to the muse and you know what you trust, then you can trust the story, or what you're in service to, then you can trust the journey that the story is taking you on. So I say all that because I feel like that's part of the process of listening for the story. And I feel like as someone that does ritual performance, there are stories that come knocking on my door that say, hey, I'd like some healing now. And I've had to, it's been a very humbling process, because I didn't have I didn't know anyone that was, I'm sure that there are people that have been doing ritual theater. It's not like it's new, but no one was in my world I didn't get to talk to anybody or get any advice. And so
I just dived in.
I just dove in, and I didn't understand that it's dangerous work, because you take an old story that's got a life force in it, and it's like, I think of it like an elder, you know, if you see some elder walk in and you're like, you know, that old rattled coat, that doesn't look good, I think I'm just going to rip that off. Well, they're going to punch you. You know, you don't go up to somebody and just rip off their clothes because it doesn't look right on them anymore. You know, and I feel like the same thing with these old stories. You know, and I feel like if you really want to go in for like real change and transformation with an old story, it's how humble can you be? How respectful can you be of its life? And that it must be coming close because it's ready to change. But like, make a nice bath. You know, like how do you slowly allow it to unravel so that you can understand the bones of a story? So an example of this might be like Sleeping Beauty as an old story, where we say, okay, we understand that there are some patriarchal perspectives. You know, there's a major victim story in this story. You know, there's some really like things that we're like, oh gosh, you know, do we really want to carry this one forward? But when you listen and you study all the different versions of that story around the world, you start to find the bones of the story. And I feel like this is one of the great wisdom stories of our time, because at the very bones of the story, it speaks about how dangerous it is to not invite everyone in the community to the table of communion. Right? Because what do we know? We've got we got the king and the queen, they can't have a baby, you know, they're praying, they're begging, they're pleading. The fairies come in, they're like, well, we'll bless you with, you know, with a baby. They throw a big party, they don't invite them. So again, we've got two key things. It's like gratitude, you know, like be thankful for what the gifts that you're given, you know, be thankful, even if it's not something that you're the most proud of. Maybe they're a little embarrassed and they, you know, it's like, no, it's like be thankful. But then also like what happens when you banish anyone from the table of communion? I feel like we're seeing this with our prisons. We're seeing this with our inner cities. We're seeing this with our homeless, you know, and it's like curses cast on the collective. So there's a genius in the story, right? There is so much wisdom in the story. So how do you approach the story where you get to still receive all the brilliance in it, but then also how do you start to listen for how it really wants to emerge through the evolutionary consciousness that we're living in right now? So there are certain parts of the characters and how they relate that wants to emerge with the rest of us, you know, that wants to emerge in this time. But I just feel like it's slow going. So when it comes to like building and rituals, I feel like there's this opportunity that when we're doing change, it's like anytime I'm changing my patterns, my behaviors, I'm going to connect with and affect my ancestors and my descendants in all their forms, right? So it's like when I'm conscious in that, so it's like, who am I to think that I can do all that heavy lifting on my own? So then what is it to be in relationship with the unseen world? And what is it to say, I can't do this on my own? I need help. And so to me, that's where ritual comes in, where it is taking conscious action to be in relationship with the unseen world. And so when we come into like a story ritual, which we did with a story called Story of the Witch, which part of that story was that there was this one witch who gave all of her wisdom to the ocean, to the wakame seaweed, so that it could be held, so that when there were those who were ready to receive it again, it would be there for them. So we tell the story, and then we serve everyone wakame. You know, so everyone got to be in relationship to this plant. And so that was really simple. You know, it was, I mean, but we did so much to prepare people for it. And I feel like that's what, when you come into ritual and ceremony, we didn't really get to do it on that night because we were filming.
Right.
But, you know, we would have had you come in slowly.
But I still felt this sense of communion. I think the word could not be chosen any better than that.
Mm.
And actually, I remember us exchanging a few words after it was over, and I was trying to tell you about the change of perception once you meet someone for the first time. You were not not ready yet. You were trying to get ready, and there were so many people arriving everywhere. I was doing my own thing with a class that I will need to attend before the storytelling would start. And there is something about this even perception of, you know, who we are changes. We see each other, there is a first approach, a first judgment, and then all of a sudden the story starts, and you approached me to tell me thank you for being such a good listener. And I think everything shifted the moment you started talking, even not in the story yet, you were already in it when you told us about how the story came about in Maui. I thought that part was just as powerful almost as the story. So this communion word, it couldn't be chosen better. And again, once you started telling the story, it's like all of a sudden I saw a part of your essence. And I wouldn't say I saw all of you, but I saw a part of your essence, and it was not the same eye that I would have on busy Leah trying to get this going, or busy Sandra trying to prepare vegetables for everybody to enjoy. This sense of this word communion could not be better chosen. Like I really felt that way. And also one thing you said, that you mentioned something just now that to me sounded like it's not even about how great the story is being told. It's like allowing the story to live and to do its own work. So that was for me a fabulous experience. It really was. Is there any secret to storytelling?
I think I may have just told you my secret, which is really about deep trust in your capacity to listen. Like really listen. And I feel like there's a listening to the muse. There's listening to the noise in your head, which can get in the way of the muse. There's the figuring out how to put down all the noise of life so that you can hear the muse. And that she can talk to you when you're doing your dishes, and that she talks to you through other people because they start saying things and you're like, oh my God, I'm being inspired for this story. It just came right through you. And I'm hearing because I'm in connection to it. And then there's craft, and there's technique, and there's that. But I honestly believe, the secret to storytelling is when you go back and you get to listen to all the original origin stories, all the creation stories, and you start to listen to all these old stories, and you start to feel their rhythms, and that it has a heartbeat, it has a rhythm to them. And when you start to carry them in your body, it's like they're living in you. And then it's like you have this living library that's living in you that you're always calling on. So, I don't know, the secret to storytelling is like know a lot of good stories. Discernment, make sure that you're listening to good stories or finding good stories and not constantly being berated by broken stories. Because if that's all that's living through you, what do you have to call on while you're making your own story?
And does this mean that the story can be changed as it goes? Did you experience, you told one story many times, and I'm sure you found, just by seeing two takes on the story, I almost heard a different story in the way you said it. But does the story change also? Like, did you ever find yourself giving a different meaning to the story, or a different ending to the story, just because it happened this way, just meeting the eye of a listener? Or
no, I feel like the story is a story. It's like, my name's Leah Lamb. You can call me whatever you want, but it's always going to be that on my birth certificate. And so the story is always a story, and as a teller, I need to know that story so I can relax. So then it can come alive in front of the people, because it's going to speak to the people that are there.
And you told us that actually the day you took the story. I need to know my story.
Yeah. That was a little rough because that was like a very fast telling of a new story.
And it was all filmed and everything. Yeah.
But like, what I've seen with stories is I tell a story called Dragon Love, and it's about this woman who thinks she knows what she's doing, and she's on this mission, and she's gonna blah, 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 blah. And this dragon comes, and, he actually should have killed her because she failed the initiation, but he kind of fell in love with her, and so he takes her to the place where she wanted to go, and then he confessed his thing, and she got really angry at him, and he's like, I kind of saved your life, you don't have to be angry at me, so it's this funny little story. Okay. And I've told it a bunch of times, and I know this story inside and out. And in this story, she's like, well, what do you want? And he says, well, I wouldn't mind a kiss. And she goes, oh, gross, I told that story in front of a group of 16-year-olds. Someone, Gloria, brought her daughter who was turning 16 and all of her friends to the telling of that story. And it was a story ceremony or an initiation. And she thought, this is a great 16-year-old birthday experience, which was so amazing. When I got to that scene, that would normally just be like a little throw off. It was like, oh, yuck. She was like, oh, blah, blah. Oh, God, don't ask me to do that. No. She was cruel. She was cruel.
Yeah.
And afterwards I was like, God, why did the story express itself in that way, in that group? And I was like, oh, well, maybe 16-year-old girls needed to see what cruelty looks like, and how it doesn't look very good on others, And so I think that I've learned, do the whales normally fart out loud? No, but we had little kids there, so what comes alive in front of them, It's so, with this, there are some ancient stories where you have to say them word for word for word. And they're 3-day, 4-day stories. And if the storyteller got one word wrong, he had to stop over and start at the beginning. Wow. Because there was a magic that was prevailing through the exact telling of that story. This is a different kind of story. This is where you're in, the story inside and out. And there's certain parts of the poetry that beg to be spoken in a certain way. And there's certain things for timing and for climactic buildup and things like that. But then there's also another emergence that happens. And I've told the same story 20 times, and the 20th time I heard something I'd never heard before. And it was all using the exact same words. And that to me is the magic of storytelling and the magic of what happens with people, because it's magic. The story,
magic. There's no question
it happens through the people that are there.
It is magic, there's no question about it. And the moment you start a story, even twice you started a story just now, and I've learned to work a lot on my own feelings, but I do feel immediately a mention of a dragon, and I'm snapping into a different world. And it's something that I know from childhood that has helped me a lot. Just like you said, the world, the reading was taking you into a world that allows you to live what you were going through. Yeah. But yeah, there is total magic for me in those symbolic element, people, animals. You talked about environmental justice. Where have you taken your storytelling in conjunction with environmental justice?
Yeah. Well, my biggest project to date is a massive book series called The Whale Dreamer. And it's magical realism. And it's a story that came and knocked on my door. And I'd been, dealing with that question of what's my place to play in these times? What's my spoke in the wheel? And I really didn't know at the time. I just knew that I really, this whole climate change story, that was kind of a big deal. And I think we had to go save the world or something, and it was at that time in my life. And as I was listening, this story came knocking on my door. And as I started to watch the story reveal itself, I was like, oh my God, I have a campaign. I have a social impact campaign where people can read this book, and then once they're done reading the book, they can, if they get excited or they get informed about the oceans, and they become aware of, wow, all the dangers that our beloved sea creatures are facing. It's a war on that world right now, out and out war. And we can't see it because we're above the surface, but we can tell a story from below the surface, from that other world. And so if someone reads that, they're like, wow, I want to protect my local ocean, or I want to get involved with the Panamanian golden frog who speaks with its arms, then they can go to our website, and we have the Library of Belonging, where they can learn about all these animals that are endangered and how to protect them. But more importantly, it's about how to get localized in your own community. Learn about your trees, learn about your soil, learn about your watershed, learn about, if we're all taken care of,
what's happening right next to us,
then
it's possible.
Yeah.
It makes it possible.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, many people teach storytelling. They teach this like format. Do you find that you like to follow a format, or do you create your own format, or do you let the story appear and change and flow in the format that it presents itself?
Yeah.
Or is it different every time?
Yeah. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've created, I mean, I say that humbly because I just got really inspired. Is what really happened. I opened, like the music knocked. I said, the music went knock, knock, and I went, who's there? And it was like, and I was like, oh God, that's a really big book to hold. So I have been working with, basically the principle of myth, magic, and medicine. So this principle of how do you know the old stories? How do you get to know yourself as a magician in terms of being a conscious creator? And then how do we consciously work with story as a tool for healing and transformation? And that's the part that's my spoke in the wheel. I love working with story in that way. And so I have a school for sacred storytelling. And in that, we teach, I think it's 6 different kinds of stories. So for me, it's like when you say, like, do you teach storytelling? I feel like phase 1 is more and more, so many people have had their relationship with their life force, like, scrubbed out of them, where they don't know how to trust their own creativity. And so honestly, I feel like I have to start there. I didn't realize how much time we would need to spend there with people, helping them learn how to trust themselves, how to trust their intuition, how to trust the creative life force that wants to come through them. So that's really ground zero in terms of, like, I don't need to teach the 6 bullet points of telling a story. I think that's creating a clone. Yes, we know how to manipulate people. We understand that, if I was to be very unpoetic about what is a story, we could call it an operating system that teaches us our beliefs and our values, what we believe is possible. And we learn that through our fairy tales, we learn that through our television programming, we learn it through all these different things. But I would also call a story, that's the, 21st century expression of it. I would say that a story is a library of the soul, where it's like we get to participate in our evolutionary consciousness, where it's like I can tell you a wisdom story. And a wisdom story is a story where something that really sucked in my life, it's something that I don't necessarily, maybe I didn't wish didn't happen, but it happened. And it was an initiation. I got initiated by life, and it involved some discomfort and some suffering, but I figured out how to make it through with my life intact, and I'm not the same person anymore. And something had to be let go of. I had to release something in order to keep going, and something was revealed, some gem, some strength, something that I didn't know I had if this initiation hadn't happened, hadn't called it forward. So that's the kind of story where it's like, that's not me just talking about, oh man, my life so sucked, poor me. This is a wisdom story where I tell you about something, a journey that I had, but I tell it with intention, and I tell it knowing that my life means something, and that I can help others. Like, you don't make that the same, you don't have to go through the same journey. You can pick up your journey where I left off, because you can go that much further as we jump frog with each other's wisdom stories. So I teach, we have medicine stories that are, I would say, like that play that I told you about, that was a medicine story. I went in for healing for myself, and that was what revealed. So some stories I don't feel like they're for other people. I just need to be able to have some medicine. And I feel like for me, one of the other things that is just such a delight and a challenge is learning the language of symbol and myth, or a metaphor, and getting to understand that this is the language of story. We study English and French and Spanish, and this is actually another language it's almost becoming like extinct. And so we've become so literal because we don't remember, we don't understand symbol and metaphor, and that's what we're made of. And that's what stories are made of, and that's how stories live in us and guide us through life. So if we don't understand that, then it's really hard to live as a full human, because you're operating off of this like linear data-based reality, which is a fragment of the whole.
Wow, that's fascinating and beautiful. So this school, this sacred school, a sacred story school.
School for Sacred
When did it start?
It's been emerging, but I think it officially took on that title this year. And I've been working with this curriculum for 4 years, where it's been slowly creating itself. And so we go through each chakra of the body, because we look at, there's an energy system, and our stories live inside of us. And if a story gets stuck somewhere, that energy is stuck, and we don't know how to make sense of it. Then, so we do these creative intensives where we actually go through and we're like, what is living in our bodies? What are the stories that are there that want to be out or need to get out or are ready to come out? And then we use all these creative processes to get in there and muck around. And then we come out and we work on like one specific story framework at a time. So a teaching story or a medicine story or a wisdom story or a vision story.
And can you tell us a small story?
There's a story that wants to come up for you, and I don't know why, but when you asked, this is, they always, one of my mentors, he told me, and I was like, really, you do that? He was like, oh yeah. He was like, yeah, I just go onto the stage and I look out at everybody, and then the story tells me who was ready to talk to them. And so I was like, okay.
I love that.
So this is a story that wants to come forward for you right now. And the story came alive when I was in Kauai. And I was, driving in Kauai is such a peaceful experience. Like most people aren't in much of a rush. There's not too much traffic, or at least there didn't used to be. And it's kind of pleasant. People wave, it's nice. But you can always tell when someone just gets off the plane because they'll use their horn. And it's a rare thing. Like, you just don't hear car horns very often. And on this day, I was hearing like the car alarm horn, like that, bonk, bonk, bonk. And I'm like, why? Like, why did somebody invent something that would disturb so much peace in the world? And that question, the story came in. And so this is a story that came through. Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, at a time not so long ago, there was this angel, and she was something. I mean, she had been at the side of greatest musicians, Nobel Peace Prize winners. I mean, she had her game down, and this was going to be her last gig. And she was given a very, very big task, but she was totally up for it. And she comes to Earth and she meets her, the being that she's going to be living beside in this life and inspiring. And he's a very nice young child. And, his parents are a little bit in conflict with what she is here to do. They're convinced that he should be a doctor or a lawyer, a neurosurgeon would do, and this boy listened to them, and she was at his side the whole time, and they would play, and they would, she was really into trying to get him to play different musical instruments, as many as he possibly could. She would inspire him, but he was a very, he really listened to his parents and respected his parents, and he went through all the education, and she was getting a little bit worried. College happened, and he wasn't really listening to her much, and then graduate school happened, and it wasn't happening. PhD, and he is not listening to her. And she's just like, wow, like maybe I'm losing my touch. And then one day they're like in the middle of a busy street. How many times had she picked him out of the street or fended off a car from hitting him because he wasn't paying attention or on his phone? But this moment they're on the busy street, and he like stops for this moment, and it's like there was this moment where he was open, and she saw her moment where she could actually inspire him to do this thing that he was supposed to do. And there was, when it was Beethoven's turn, she was able to grab a bird and like give the bird the tone, and the bird sang it, and Beethoven heard it, and it was all great. But they're in the middle of a city street. He's like, there's no birds around, so she jumps into a car and she honks it out on the car horn. And he's like, brilliant idea. And he goes off and he creates a patent for the car horn alarm. She's just miffed. That was so not what she intended, and she was pretty sure that she knew that he knew that that's not what she meant. She thought maybe love would make him happy, and when he was like unhappy and dopamine and all that goodness, he would be once again open to like, hello, his true life mission. No. She brought him some great candidates. No. Children, no, none of it. She even introduced him to some like really great jobs. No. It was the end of his life. He was an old man. And he was in that hospital bed, and he was dying, and right in between the dimensions. And she's there dying right beside him. And as he's in between the dimensions, he takes his hand and he places it on hers. He goes, there you are. And she goes, you know me? He goes, I've known you my whole life. She's like, but if you knew that I was here your whole life, why didn't you ever listen to me? He said, playing the harmonics that would create world peace. Please. If I did that, economies would fail. I would have been shot. It would have been a mess. I didn't want that life. The women, marriage, love. You could have had that. He goes, I loved you. I didn't want to do anything to make you go away. And with that, he took his last breath, as did she.
Wow.
So that's a little story from a car horn alarm.
I want to keep that one with me. And keeping the energy of the story. Wow, this is a perfect story for me. And I think things will unfold from this one. The first thing you started with actually ringed immediately. I got in the story immediately, and you mentioned he went and he was going to get all his degrees. And we've been talking a lot about this, notably with my daughter, who is becoming a doctor, medical doctor, and we've been pondering about the title and what does it feel like. Why do some people remain called Salome Beg, your name, or why would she want to introduce herself in a new circle, in a new environment as Dr. Salome Beg? And it has taken a great place in her life to question who are we behind the titles, and are the titles so important? And I came across this with friends also, about what does this prefix in front of your name may mean, and if you end up using it, or if you end up hiding behind it, if it's serving your interaction with others, as to what the knowledge that you acquired along with it will, how you will serve others, or how you end up the fine line between that and between hiding behind the title because it has become what you think, part of your essence. And we've been pondering that. So the moment you mention this running after the degrees, which also permit us wrongly, if you ask me, but to judge people on their background. And this is actually the very part of this podcast that I mentioned to you before we started. We're talking about you today, and I'm sure you are a bunch of amazing things, but we can talk about all those things that brought you here, but the rest is not that necessary, because what matters really is who you are today and what you're giving us, me, and in that moment. So this story is really, really speaking to me, and from the very first second that you started to say it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
That was just wonderful.
You are
Thank
an
you for
amazing
making
listener.
I think I think you might have perceived it, but there is something that shifts in me. There is this split that happens to me in storytelling when I listen to stories, and it did from when I was a kid. And again, this is what I think it's a mechanism that I've learned to survive, and it's a coping mechanism. So, but this one seems to be a good coping mechanism, not one that I need to get rid of today.
No,
so,
you can focus. Not many people know how to focus.
And I don't in many aspects of my life, but stories, I'm right?
Yeah.
Having to write the stories?
Yeah, I'm all over.
Where's the focus then?
But we can't.
We're trying to write this like documentation and tell it.
And
every time I'm like, come on, let's get writing. She's like, oh wait, but I need to.
And it's all about feelings. I remember the feelings. Yeah.
I understand.
Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. Such a pleasure.